Welcome back to Major Antonio's presentation of My Disillusionment in Russia by Emma Goldman. Chapter 7, Rest Homes for Workers.
Since my return from Moscow, I noticed a change in Zoran's attitude. He was reserved, distant, and not as friendly as when we first met. I ascribed it to the fact that he was overworked and fatigued, and not wishing to waste his valuable time, I ceased visiting the Zorans as frequently as before. One day, however, he called up to ask if Alexander Berkman and myself would join him in certain work he was planning, and which was to be done in hurry-up American style, as he put it. On calling to see him, we found him rather excited, an unusual thing for Zoran, who was generally quiet and reserved. He was full of a new scheme to build rest homes for workers. He explained that on Kameny Ostrov were the magnificent mansions of the Stolypins, the Polovtsovs, and others of the aristocracy and bourgeoisie, and that he was planning to turn them into recreation centers for workers. Would we join in the work? Of course we consented eagerly, and the next morning we went over to inspect the island. It was indeed an ideal spot, dotted with magnificent mansions, some of them veritable museums, containing rare gems of painting, tapestry, and furniture. The man in charge of the buildings called our attention to the art treasures, protesting that they would be injured or entirely destroyed if put to the planned use. But Zoran was set on his scheme. Recreation homes for workers are more important than art, he said. We returned to the Astoria determined to devote ourselves to the work and to go at it intensively, as the houses were to be ready for the 1st of May. We prepared detailed plans for dining rooms, sleeping chambers, reading rooms, theater and lecture halls, and recreation places for the workers. As the first and most necessary step, we proposed the organization of a dining room to feed the workers who were to be employed in preparing the place for their comrades. I had learned from my previous experience with the hotels that much valuable time was lost because of the failure to provide for those actually employed on such work. Zoran consented and promised that we were to take charge within a few days. But a week passed and nothing further was heard about what was to be a rush job. Some time later, Zoran called up to ask us to accompany him to the island. On our arrival there, we found half a dozen commissars already in charge, with scores of people idling about. Zoran reassured us that matters would arrange themselves and that we should have an opportunity to organize the work as planned. However, we soon realized that the newly fledged officialdom was as hard to cope with as the old bureaucracy. Every commissar had his favorites whom he managed to list as employed on the job, thereby entitling them to bread rations and a meal. Thus, almost before any actual workers appeared on the scene, 80 alleged technicians were already in possession of dinner tickets and bread cards. The men actually mobilized for the work received hardly anything. The result was general sabotage. Most of the men sent over to prepare the rest homes for the workers came from concentration camps. They were convicts and military deserters. I had often watched them at work, and in justice to them it must be said that they did not overexert themselves. Why should we, they would say? We are fed on Sovietsky soup, dirty dishwater it is, and we receive only what is left over from the idlers who order us about. And who will rest in these homes? Not we or our brothers in the factories. Only those who belong to the party or who have a pull will enjoy this place. Besides, the spring is near. We are needed at home on the farm. Why are we kept here? Indeed, they did not exert themselves, those stalwart sons of Russia's soil. There was no incentive. They had no point of contact with the life about them, and there was no one who could translate to them the meaning of work in revolutionary Russia. They were dazed by war, revolution, and hunger. Nothing could rouse them out of their stupor. Many of the buildings on Kameny Ostrov had been taken up for boarding schools and homes for defectives. Some were occupied by old professors, teachers, and other intellectuals. Since the revolution, these people lived there unmolested, but now orders came to vacate, to make room for the rest homes. As almost no provision had been made to supply the dispossessed ones with other quarters, they were practically forced into the streets. Those friendly with Zinoviev, Gorky, or other influential communists took their troubles to them, but persons lacking pull found no redress. The scenes of misery which I was compelled to witness daily exhausted my energies. It was all unnecessarily cruel, impractical, without any bearing on the revolution. Added to this was the chaos and confusion which prevailed. The bureaucratic officials seemed to take particular delight in countermanding each other's orders. Houses already in the process of renovation, and on which much work and material were spent, would suddenly be left unfinished and some other work begun. Mansions filled with art treasures were turned into night lodgings, and dirty iron cots put among antique furniture and oil paintings, an incongruous, stupid waste of time and energy. Zorin would frequently hold consultations by the hour with the staff of artists and engineers, making plans for theaters, lecture halls, and amusement places, while the commissars sabotaged the work. I stood the painful and ridiculous situation for 2 weeks, then gave up the matter in despair. Early in May, the workers' rest homes on Kameny Ostrov were opened with much pomp, music, and speeches. Glowing accounts were sent broadcast of the marvelous things done for the workers in Russia. In reality, it was Coney Island transferred to the environs of Petrograd, a gaudy showplace for credulous visitors. From that time on, Zorin's demeanor to me changed. He became cold, even antagonistic. No doubt he began to sense the struggle which was going on within me, and the break which was bound to come. I did, however, see much of Lisa Zorin, who had just become a mother. I nursed her and her baby, glad of the opportunity thus to express my gratitude for the warm friendship the Zorins had shown me during my first months in Russia. I appreciated their sterling honesty and devotion. Both were so favorably placed politically that they could be supplied with everything they wanted, yet Lisa Zorin lacked the simplest garments for her baby. Thousands of Russian working women have no more, and why should I? Lisa would say. When she was so weak that she could not nurse her baby, Zorin could not be induced to ask for special rations. I had to conspire against them by buying eggs and butter on the market to save the lives of mother and child. But their fine quality of character made my inner struggle the more difficult. Reason urged me to look the social facts in the face. My personal attachment to the communists I had learned to know and esteem refused to accept the facts. Never mind the evils, I would say to myself. As long as there are such as the Zorins and the Balabanovas, there must be something vital in the ideas they represent. I held on tenaciously to the phantom I had myself created.
Chapter 8, the 1st of May in Petrograd.
In 1890, the 1st of May was for the first time celebrated in America as Labor's international holiday. May Day became to me a great, inspiring event. To witness the celebration of the 1st of May in a free country, it was something to dream of, to long for, but perhaps never to be realized. And now in 1920, the dream of many years was about to become real in revolutionary Russia. I could hardly await the morning of May 1st. It was a glorious day, with the warm sun melting away the last crust of the hard winter. Early in the morning, strains of music greeted me. Groups of workers and soldiers were marching through the streets, singing revolutionary songs. The city was gaily decorated. The Uritsky Square, facing the Winter Palace, was a mass of red, the streets nearby a veritable riot of color. Great crowds were about, all wending their way to the Field of Mars, where the heroes of the revolution were buried. Though I had an admission card to the reviewing stand, I preferred to remain among the people, to feel myself a part of the great hosts that had brought about the world event. This was their day, the day of their making. Yet, they seemed peculiarly quiet, oppressively silent. There was no joy in their singing, no mirth in their laughter. Mechanically they marched, automatically they responded to the clackers on the reviewing stand, shouting hurrah as the columns passed. In the evening, a pageant was to take place. Long before the appointed hour, the Uritsky Square, down to the palace and to the banks of the Neva, was crowded with people gathered to witness the open-air performance, symbolizing the triumph of the people. The play consisted of 3 parts, the first portraying the conditions which led up to the war and the role of the German socialists in it. The second reproduced the February Revolution, with Kerensky in power. The last, the October Revolution. It was a play beautifully set and powerfully acted, a play vivid, real, fascinating. It was given on the steps of the former stock exchange, facing the square. On the highest step sat kings and queens with their courtiers, attended by soldiery in gay uniforms. The scene represents a gala court affair. The announcement is made that a monument is to be built in honor of world capitalism. There is much rejoicing, and a wild orgy of music and dance ensues. Then from the depths there emerge the enslaved and toiling masses, their chains ringing mournfully to the music above. They are responding to the command to build the monument for their masters. Some are seen carrying hammers and anvils, others stagger under the weight of huge blocks of stone and loads of brick. The workers are toiling in their world of misery and darkness, lashed to greater effort by the whip of the slave drivers, while above there is light and joy, and the masters are feasting. The completion of the monument is signaled by large yellow discs hoisted on high amidst the rejoicing of the world on top. At this moment, a little red flag is seen waving below, and a small figure is haranguing the people. Angry fists are raised, and then flag and figure disappear, only to reappear again in different parts of the underworld. Again, the red flag waves, now here, now there. The people slowly gain confidence and presently become threatening. Indignation and anger grow. The kings and queens become alarmed. They fly to the safety of the citadels, and the army prepares to defend the stronghold of capitalism. It is August 1914. The rulers are again feasting, and the workers are slaving. The members of the Second International attend the confab of the mighty. They remain deaf to the plea of the workers to save them from the horrors of war. Then the strains of God Save the King announce the arrival of the English army. It is followed by Russian soldiers with machine guns and artillery, and a procession of nurses and cripples, the tribute to the Moloch of war. The next act pictures the February Revolution. Red flags appear everywhere, armed motor cars dash about. The people storm the Winter Palace and haul down the emblem of Tsardom. The Kerensky government assumes control, and the people are driven back to war. Then comes the marvelous scene of the October Revolution, with soldiers and sailors galloping along the open space before the white marble building. They dash up the steps into the palace. There is a brief struggle, and the victors are hailed by the masses in wild jubilation. The Internationale floats upon the air. It mounts higher and higher into exultant peals of joy. Russia is free. The workers, sailors, and soldiers usher in the new era, the beginning of the world commune. Tremendously stirring was the picture. But the vast mass remained silent. Only a faint applause was heard from the great throng. I was dumbfounded. How explain this astonishing lack of response? When I spoke to Lisa Zorin about it, she said that the people had actually lived through the October Revolution, and that the performance necessarily fell flat by comparison with the reality of 1917. But my little communist neighbor gave a different version. The people had suffered so many disappointments since October 1917, she said, that the revolution has lost all meaning to them. The play had the effect of making their disappointment more poignant.
Chapter 9. Industrial Militarization.
The Ninth Congress of the All-Russian Communist Party, held in March 1920, was characterized by a number of measures which meant a complete turn to the right. Foremost among them was the militarization of labor and the establishment of one-man management of industry, as against the collegiate shop system. Obligatory labor had long been a law upon the statutes of the Socialist Republic, but it was carried out, as Trotsky said, only in a small private way. Now the law was to be made effective in earnest. Russia was to have a militarized industrial army to fight economic disorganization, even as the Red Army had conquered on the various fronts. Such an army could be whipped into line only by rigid discipline, it was claimed. The factory collegiate system had to make place for military-industrial management. The measure was bitterly fought at the Congress by the communist minority, but party discipline prevailed. However, the excitement did not abate. Discussion of the subject continued long after the Congress adjourned. Many of the younger communists agreed that the measure indicated a step to the right, but they defended the decision of their party. The collegiate system has proven a failure, they said. The workers will not work voluntarily, and our industry must be revived if we are to survive another year. Jack Reed also held this view. He had just returned after a futile attempt to reach America through Latvia, and for days we argued about the new policy. Jack insisted it was unavoidable so long as Russia was being attacked and blockaded. We have been compelled to mobilize an army to fight our external enemies. Why not an army to fight our worst internal enemy, hunger? We can do it only by putting our industry on its feet. I pointed out the danger of the military method and questioned whether the workers could be expected to become efficient or to work intensively under compulsion. Still, Jack thought mobilization of labor unavoidable. It must be tried anyhow, he said. Petrograd at the time was filled with rumors of strikes. The story made the rounds that Zinoviev and his staff, while visiting the factories to explain the new policies, were driven by the workers from the premises. To learn about the situation at first hand, I decided to visit the factories. Already during my first months in Russia, I had asked Zorin for permission to see them. Lisa Zorin had requested me to address some labor meetings, but I declined because I felt that it would be presumptuous on my part to undertake to teach those who had made the revolution. Besides, I was not quite at home with the Russian language then. But when I asked Zorin to let me visit some factories, he was evasive. After I had become acquainted with Ravitch, I approached her on the subject, and she willingly consented. The first works to be visited were the Pudilov, the largest and most important engine and car manufacturing establishment. 40,000 workers had been employed there before the war. Now I was informed that only 7,000 were at work. I had heard much of the Pudilovtsi. They had played a heroic part in the revolutionary days and in the defense of Petrograd against Yudenich. At the Pudilov office, we were cordially received, shown about the various departments, and then turned over to a guide. There were 4 of us in the party, of whom only 2 could speak Russian. I lagged behind to question a group working at a bench. At first, I was met with the usual suspicion, which I overcame by telling the men that I was bringing the greetings of their brothers in America. "And the revolution there?" I was immediately asked. It seemed to have become a national obsession, this idea of a near revolution in Europe and America. Everybody in Russia clung to that hope. It was hard to rob those misinformed people of their naive faith. "The American Revolution is not yet," I told them, "but the Russian Revolution has found an echo among the proletariat in America." I inquired about their work, their lives, and their attitude toward the new decrees. "As if we had not been driven enough before," complained one of the men. "Now we are to work under the military nagaika, whip. Of course, we will have to be in the shop, or they will punish us as industrial deserters. But how can they get more work out of us? We are suffering hunger and cold. We have no strength to give more." I suggested that the government was probably compelled to introduce such methods, and that if Russian industry were not revived, the condition of the workers would grow even worse. Besides, the Pudilov men were receiving the preferred payok. "We understand the great misfortune that has befallen Russia," one of the workers replied, "but we cannot squeeze more out of ourselves. Even the 2 pounds of bread we are getting is not enough." "Look at the bread," he said, holding up a black crust. "Can we live on that? And our children? If not for our people in the country or some trading on the market, we would die altogether." Now comes the new measure which is tearing us away from our people, sending us to the other end of Russia, while our brothers from there are going to be dragged here, away from their soil. It's a crazy measure, and it won't work. "But what can the government do in the face of the food shortage?" I asked. "Food shortage," the man exclaimed. "Look at the markets. Did you see any shortage of food there? Speculation and the new bourgeoisie, that's what's the matter. The one-man management is our new slave driver. First the bourgeoisie sabotaged us, and now they are again in control. But just let them try to boss us. They'll find out. Just let them try." The men were bitter and resentful. Presently the guide returned to see what had become of me. He took great pains to explain that industrial conditions in the mill had improved considerably since the militarization of labor went into effect. The men were more content, and many more cars had been renovated and engines repaired than within an equal period under the previous management. There were 7,000 productively employed in the works, he assured me. I learned, however, that the real figure was less than 5,000, and that of these only about 2,000 were actual workers. The others were government officials and clerks. After the Pudilov works, we visited the Trigolnik, the great rubber factory of Russia. The place was clean and the machinery in good order, a well-equipped modern plant. When we reached the main workroom, we were met by the superintendent, who had been in charge for 25 years. He would show us around himself, he said. He seemed to take great pride in the factory, as if it were his own. It rather surprised me that they had managed to keep everything in such fine shape. The guide explained that it was because nearly the whole of the old staff had been left in charge. They felt that whatever might happen, they must not let the place go to ruin. It was certainly very commendable, I thought, but soon I had occasion to change my mind. At one of the tables, cutting rubber, was an old worker with kindly eyes looking out of a sad, spiritual face. He reminded me of the pilgrim Luca in Gorky's Night Lodgings. Our guide kept a sharp vigil, but I managed to slip away while the superintendent was explaining some machinery to the other members of our group. "Well, Batyushka, how is it with you?" I greeted the old worker. "Bad, Matushka," he replied. "Times are very hard for us old people." I told him how impressed I was to find everything in such good condition in the shop. "That is so," commented the old worker, "but it is because the superintendent and his staff are hoping from day to day that there may be a change again, and that the Trigolnik will go back to its former owners. I know them. I have worked here long before the German master of this plant put in the new machinery." Passing through the various rooms of the factory, I saw the women and girls look up in evident dread. It seemed strange in a country where the proletarians were the masters. Apparently, the machines were not the only things that had been carefully watched over. The old discipline, too, had been preserved. The employees thought us Bolshevik inspectors. The great flour mill of Petrograd, visited next, looked as if it were in a state of siege, with armed soldiers everywhere, even inside the workrooms. The explanation given was that large quantities of precious flour had been vanishing. The soldiers watched the millmen as if they were galley slaves, and the workers naturally resented such humiliating treatment. They hardly dared to speak. One young chap, a fine-looking fellow, complained to me of the conditions. "We are here virtual prisoners," he said. "We cannot make a step without permission. We are kept hard at work 8 hours, with only 10 minutes for our kipyatok, boiled water, and we are searched on leaving the mill." "Is not the theft of flour the cause of the strict surveillance?" I asked. "Not at all," replied the boy. "The commissars of the mill and the soldiers know quite well where the flour goes to." I suggested that the workers might protest against such a state of affairs. "Protest? To whom?" the boy exclaimed. "We'd be called speculators and counter-revolutionists, and we'd be arrested." "Has the revolution given you nothing?" I asked. "Ah, the revolution, but that is no more. Finished," he said bitterly. The following morning we visited the La Ferme tobacco factory. The place was in full operation. We were conducted through the plant and the whole process was explained to us, beginning with the sorting of the raw material and ending with the finished cigarettes packed for sale or shipment. The air in the workrooms was stifling, nauseating. "The women are used to this atmosphere," said the guide. "They don't mind." There were some pregnant women at work and girls no older than 14. They looked haggard, their chests sunken, black rings under their eyes. Some of them coughed, and the hectic flush of consumption showed on their faces. "Is there a recreation room, a place where they can eat or drink their tea and inhale a bit of fresh air?" There was no such thing, I was informed. The women remained at work 8 consecutive hours. They had their tea and black bread at their benches. The system was that of piecework, the employees receiving 25 cigarettes daily above their pay with permission to sell or exchange them. I spoke to some of the women. They did not complain except about being compelled to live far away from the factory. In most cases, it required more than 2 hours to go to and from work. They had asked to be quartered near the La Ferme, and they received a promise to that effect, but nothing more was heard of it. Life certainly has a way of playing peculiar pranks. In America, I should have scorned the idea of social welfare work. I should have considered it a cheap palliative. But in socialist Russia, the sight of pregnant women working in suffocating tobacco air and saturating themselves and their unborn with the poison impressed me as a fundamental evil. I spoke to Lisa Zorin to see whether something could not be done to ameliorate the evil. Lisa claimed that piecework was the only way to induce the girls to work. As to restrooms, the women themselves had already made a fight for them, but so far nothing could be done because no space could be spared in the factory. But if even such small improvements had not resulted from the revolution, I argued, what purpose has it served? The workers have achieved control, Lisa replied. They are now in power, and they have more important things to attend to than restrooms. They have the revolution to defend. Lisa Zorin had remained very much the proletarian, but she reasoned like a nun dedicated to the service of the church. The thought oppressed me that what she called the defense of the revolution was really only the defense of her party in power. At any rate, nothing came of my attempt at social welfare work.
This concludes today's reading of My Disillusionment in Russia, by Emma Goldman. Join us also the day after tomorrow for the subsequent part. Subscribe to Major Antonio's channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.